All right, so for this video, there's a few things that we're going to do. One, we're going to find quartile, our first quartile, second quartile, and our third quartile. That's what they mean. So when we have this Q1, that is equivalent to our first quartile. All right, and being able to find these three things is very important for the next section that we're doing. When we do a box and a whisker graph or plot, we need to be able to find our different quartiles. So we're going to find this in the video, and then we're going to go ahead and figure out a way of how we can find out what outliers we have. Because we've discussed and talked about outliers in the set before, but now we can specifically find them and know for sure if we have any. All right, so the first thing that we want to do when we're finding our quartiles is we need to rearrange our data from the least to greatest. So it would be 5, 6, 12, 13, 15. 18, 22, and 50. All right, so we list the data that we have from least to greatest. So it's very important that we do that. And then we can think about these quartiles on the number line. Right, and the first one that we're going to find is our second quartile, because our second quartile is actually our median. It is the data or the part that splits our data into 50%. So we need to find the median of this data. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So when we have 8 values, we know that we need to take the average of the 2 in the middle. So 13 plus 15 divided by 2, that is going to be 28 divided by 2, or 14. So on this number line, this 14 is our second quartile. All right, so that is our second quartile. All right, so that means we found so far one of them. We've already found our second quartile, which is our median. And then all the first quartile it is the median of this first region. So it's the median of the values that are less than our median. And then our third quartile is the median of our values greater than our median. So all we're doing now then is in this region, we will list all the values that we have that are less than 14. So that is 5, 6, 12, and 13, because 13 was less than 14. So even though this was used to calculate our median, it is still less than it. And then we will then find the median of these numbers. So then since we have an even number, we need to add these two together and divide by 2. So that means our median of our first set of our digits, or the first half of our digits, is 9, and that is our first quartile. And then to find our third quartile, that is the median of the values greater than our second quartile, or greater than our median of our whole data set. So that will then be 15, 18, 22, and 50. So then here we have 4 digits. So once again, we'll add these two numbers together, the 2 in the middle. So 18 plus 22 divided by 2 is equal to 20. So that means our third quartile is 20. So in order to find our second quartile, it's simply just the median of our values. So 14 was the median, so that is our second quartile. And then to find our first quartile is we look at all of our data values that are less than our median, and we take the median of that. So here essentially we're finding 3 medians. Our first quartile is the median of our lower half. The second quartile is the middle of our value, the median of our values, and the third quartile is the median of our upper half. Right? And one of the things that we can think of is when we find this, 25% of our data will be below quartile 1, 25% of our data will be between our first and second quartile, 25% of our data will be between our second and third quartile, and 25% of our data will be greater than our third quartile. All right, so when we are finding our quartiles, we're splitting them up into even percentages. So we're finding them up into 25% of our data will fall in this region, 25% will fall in this region, 25 and 25. All right, there's one other thing that we need to discuss because we need to use it for the last part of this video, and that is finding our interquartile range. So our interquartile range. Or as you'll see it listed, your IQR. Right? And what your IQR is it represents 50% of our data. So our interquartile range will always be 50% of our data. And what it is, it's the values that are listed between our first and third quartile. So all we need to do is we take our third quartile and we subtract our first quartile from it. So if we go back to our problem, we had 20 and 9. So 20 minus 9, that is 11. So that means our interquartile value would be 11, and our interquartile range 50%. But this is how we would calculate it. It is the difference between our first and our third quartile. All right, so that is just going over finding our quartiles and our interquartile range. Now this is important. This number here is very important for the next thing that we're going to do in this video, and the last thing. All right, so now if we want to calculate for any outliers, that's what we're trying to do here. What outliers are is it's any values that are extremely high or extremely low when compared to the rest of the data values. And you may look at this and say, oh, well, 50 is an outlier. But we were always just kind of approximating that. Now we can say definitively if something is an outlier or not. And it's just a simple little formula that you have to follow. So the first thing you need to do is you need to find your first and your third quartile, because we need to solve for our interquartile range. So we already did these values before. So our second quartile was 14. Our first quartile was 9. And our third quartile was 20. This is the exact same problem that we just completed. Okay, but to find your outlier, we only need to find our first quartile and our third quartile. It's not really the median that we have to find, right? Because we need to solve for our interquartile range. So we would then do 20 minus 9. So our interquartile range is 11. Right? So that is the first step that we need to do when finding if we have any outliers, is we find the interquartile range. Right? Then we take that value and we need to multiply it by 1.5. So this is the second step. So we find our IQR, and then our second step is we multiply by 1.5. So 11 times 1.5 is equal to 16.5. And then our third step is we will subtract the value from step 2 from our first quartile, and then we add to our third quartile. So we will then take 9 and we subtract 16.5 from it. That is negative 7.5. And then we take our third quartile, 20, and we add 16.5 from it, and that's 36.5. So if we have any values that fall outside of this range, so that are outside of negative 7.5 through 36.5. So if we have any values that fall either to the left of this or to the right of this, that means they are an outlier. So we don't have any negative numbers, so there's no outliers to the left of this. However, 50 is greater than 36.5, so that means 50 is an outlier. Right? 22.5 is less than 36.5, so it is not an outlier. So the only outlier that we have here is 50. All right, I know I kind of went through this a little crazy or hectically, but we're going to go through this. Any questions that you have, we'll go through it in class. But I just wanted to make sure you guys saw the steps so we can go through it quicker than if you just saw this for the first time in class.